She's closing her eyes, she's starting to dream.
Right, so this is Adam from AModelOfControl.com at Stayinfest, and we're here with Dusty from Vision Video. Hey, Dusty, how's it going?
Hey, Adam. Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Bit of a crazy week, but you know, we're getting there.
Good.
So, you may not be a name that many of our UK listeners will probably know, although I suspect there's probably a few that do. Tell me about your band. What's going on?
Yeah, so I'm the lead singer and guitarist of the band Vision Video. We're from Athens, Georgia, here in the sweltering heat of the South. And we are a self-described goth pop band. I think that's very adequately apt for our band. We basically take a lot of cues from early 80s, late 70s, early 80s post-punk and sort of proto-goth rock bands like Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, Bauhaus, Joy Division. But we're sort of doing it in a way that's very accessible and sort of a modern slant on those bands that we all love. So it's got sort of the dark undertones of that sort of music, but I also wanted to do it in a way that was inviting to sort of new audiences or people that have just not been very much exposed to that kind of stuff. Because there's a lot of people out there that don't realize that, like, those bands kind of created the milieu that is gothic rock or whatever you want to call it. And pretty much all the music is based off of, as far as like tonally and lyrically, it's based off of my experience as both an infantry officer in the Army, and I'm a paramedic and firefighter now. And just the core emotional heart of it is really all about post-traumatic stress and mental health awareness, dealing with not so lovely things in life, and tackling them sort of head on and looking at them dead in the eye instead of ignoring them, which I did for many years and did not end well for me. But music is basically catharsis for me, and that's what this band is all about. It's working through things and getting along with your skeletons in the closet, so to speak.
Huh. Well, interesting you should say about the Army element of this, because something that jumped out at me, particularly with where you're from, because Athens, Georgia, of course, is a city that I associate with quite a few bands and a kind of a thriving music scene. And obviously, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. REM and B-52s are the two big bands from Athens, Georgia. And I'm not going to say there's much of an influence sonically, but I was really interested to hear the song Agent Orange.
Oh yeah.
Because of course REM did a song about this, and I'm sure it's entirely coincidental. And yours is a very different slant to it. It's not the fury that Orange Crush is.
Yeah.
But I was fascinated by that, because and saying you've come from the Army suddenly makes more sense now. I think about that song. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Well, actually, that as much as I'd love to take credit for that song, it's a cover from a band called Ski Patrol, which is a Manchester band from 1981. They had that and another relatively well-known song, it was just the song that I discovered just a few years ago in sort of the obscurity of some of these post-punk bands that just never really crossed over, especially going into the US markets or whatever, and just sort of hid out in kind of the 80s as far as notoriety.
Some of them never even made it to us. I mean, that's Ski Patrol's a band that I'm not even sure I've ever heard of. I probably now I think about it, the song probably sounds familiar because I've heard it, but I couldn't tell you for sure.
It's definitely something. I've been sort of into the goth scene and post-punk music in general since I was about 14, so pretty much 20 years now, and that was something that I had only discovered a couple of years ago, as our bass player Dan and I DJ sort of a small goth night here in Athens, and I very regularly just scour the internet for just anything that's new or exciting, and every now and then you'll discover those old gems that are just like somebody upload something to YouTube that's like, hey, I remember seeing this band in 1982 in, you know, in Leeds or whatever, and it's like, wow, like why is this not everywhere? Like why was this not huge? But yeah, I just stumbled across that song like right in the beginning of our time where we were writing our record, and it mirrored a lot of my sentiments of warfare and just sort of the futility and the sort of like pedestrian sort of blasé attitude a bunch of Americans have about it, because we're so far removed from all of the military things that we do across the world, and there's just a lot of like jingoism and blind patriotism here that just really bothered me. And I think that song really captures sort of the duality of warfare. It's like really intense, but it's also sort of like driving and hypnotic, and just sort of like it just captured that perfectly for how I processed the war. And so we contacted the remaining members of Ski Patrol, and they were all on board with us covering it. And yeah, it's just a fantastic song. It's a simple, beautifully written song, and yeah, I think we did it in a interesting enough a way. I think with covers, the best thing is you know, still paying homage to that original track, but making it your own in a different way. And I think we did a pretty good job at that.
I think that's really important as well, because, you know, you do hear covers and you're like, that just is a carbon copy. What's the point?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah. And there are times where it's like, you know, leave it the fuck alone and it's fine as it is. But then there's other times where you're like, actually go away and do something. There's a Fugazi cover album coming.
Cool.
And Failure have covered Waiting Room, and I was like, and I love Failure, and I love Fugazi, and I was like,
yeah.
And then I heard it, and I'm like, they've done something different with this, and it sounds like Failure, and it still sounds like Waiting Room, and I think I'm going to give them a pass on this.
Yeah.
But there are some other bands that are on it, and I'm like, I don't think this is going to work.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know what you mean. I think you've got to do something to make, you know, put your stamp on it, even if it's a bit of reverence. You know, at least kind of make it sound like you love the song. Because sometimes bands phone in a cover and you're like, oh, fuck off. You know, it's just don't waste my time. But anyway, about your own music. So it's how long's the band been going for then? Because I think there's a fair few releases on Spotify. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we did a few singles like in advance of the actual LP release. We started properly, I guess, in 2018, really, where it was originally just Dan, the bass player, Dan Geller, Jason Fusco, our drummer, and I, and we started as a three-piece. And we had always kind of from the beginning had the intention of getting a keyboard player. And we played one show as a three-piece, and then Emily Friedock, our keyboard player and co-vocalist, joined on with us after the first show. And she's just a magnificent musician. She's this is her first band, but she grew up playing classical piano, so she's just like a marvelously talented.
She has a great voice as well. Is it "Comfort in the Grave" that she does? One of the kind of the single. I thought that her, like, she really adds something to it, because there's a kind of a light and shade going on, and I think it works really well. And there's this kind of I like what you're kind of, there is that poppy edge to what you do, in that, you know, some of those songs have been stuck in my head all day, so you've done it's done the job. And you know, because there is that thing sometimes when you listen to, and you're not the first post-punk interview I've done this week. I was talking to the band Spectres the other day, and
cool.
You know, and they're looking at it from a very different way, the kind of more death rock side of things.
Right.
But they've also got this kind of love from the outside that's come in from from an outside view into this scene. And we were talking about the whole idea of gatekeeping, and you know, kind of how goth is not always its best friend in terms of making the scene accessible. And I think there is that thing that there's lots and lots of ideas coming into the scene, and not by no means diluting the sound, instead adding to it and making for, you know, allowing it to progress rather than stagnate.
Right. I mean, if you look at the totality of, you know, the goth subcultural scene, I mean, there's a tendency for extreme gatekeeping. And when I first came into it, when I was a teenager here in the States, it was really bad. It was extremely staunch. Like you had to listen to XYZ. And if you dressed a certain way, it was very like uncouth. And I never really agreed with that, but I still loved the music. So, I mean, it wasn't really a problem for me, but just like watching other people get turned away from it and just turned off by the scene. And I think it's really the funniest part of it to me is basically the fact that, none of these bands that are considered sort of the proto-goth or goth bands, the genesis of goth, if you will, in the early 80s, none of them were like calling themselves goth. Like it wasn't a thing until...
And some of them actively try and walk away from that sound.
Yeah. And I mean, it's understandable. Like it's kind of, in jest now. Like I like to... poke fun at like Andrew Eldritch from the Sisters, and like his very well noted thing. But I mean, it's the thing that's funny to me about the whole scene is that there is no book, there's no rules, there's no tome sitting in some dusty crypt where somebody cracks it open and consults, is this goth? It's just it's such a nebulous term that is an umbrella for so many different aspects of subculture that fit under it, whether it's death rock or EBM, cyber goth, all these different aspects that technically fit under it. And it's like, yeah, there's some relatively constrained ideas of like what it is or is not, but it's not, I don't know, it's so silly, and it's so like exhausting for me that the argument of like, oh, is this goth or not, is still this conversation that happens over and over again. And I think that like, for me, when people ask me very regularly on sort of like social media now, like, oh, well, what do you think you're goth, or is this goth or what? I'm like, I don't know. Do you think it is? Yes. Okay. Then it is. Like
the last time I asked what is goth on Facebook, after I got asked by a French journalist in the football team I play for, that we had 700 comments on a Facebook thread, and I don't think anyone agreed. So it's just like, this is what happens every time it happens,
Yeah, exactly. It is a different thing for different people, and that's fine. I mean, it's not going to hurt anybody, and it's just, I wish people would just like start moving past that question and just focus on like creating more art and more music, more of a scene. Mm-hmm. That's how it exists and stays healthy and is inclusive, and to me that's the power of a good healthy goth scene, is that it's a completely safe place for weirdos and queer community, and I mean like just so many disenfranchised people that are into more macabre and darker tone things, but still want to have a good time. And it's, I mean, that's why I've always loved it, is just this like super inclusive thing. And when people start to gatekeep really heavily, it just becomes this like very stuffy, shitty thing that I don't really enjoy. And my favorite goth scene that I've ever been privy to is in Germany, because they're like hyper inclusive and nobody cares about like, well, what is this goth? Like it just is. And you just show it. Like I was stationed in Germany for just shy of 5 years in the military, and I went to one in Nuremberg once, and it was so much fun because like everybody was just dancing and drinking and talking, and there was just no like judgy like wallflower hang on the wall, like and there's a lot of that in the States from place to place, but I feel like it's gotten a lot better. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is just because of like social media and the internet, where people are just like able to understand a little bit more that there's not really like quote unquote rules. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the internet was still pretty fledgling, it was a lot harder to figure out like what fits into this milieu. And I don't know, I think it's a much healthier thing now.
So what's the scene like in Athens then? Is there a big goth scene there? It's never been a city I really associated with goth.
Yeah, well, so when I moved back, I left the military in 2016, and I moved back here to At the time, I thought I was going to go to graduate school, but I ended up joining a fire department. And but I knew I was coming back here to play music. And my friend and I sort of started a goth night. There really wasn't one in current rotation. So we started DJing, and I'll never forget the first time we did it. It was 2016, and I was like, it was free, and it was just like on the rooftop of this bar that we worked at. And I was like, I wonder if anybody's going to come to this, because we had like advertised it and everything. And then it was like packed. There were like 200 people there. And it's very bizarre because like Atlanta has a very big goth scene. But there's a lot of people that live around Athens that are just sort of out in the wilderness, so to speak. There's just like there's a lot of very rural areas around here. And a lot of those people don't really want to drive like 2 hours to Atlanta to go to a goth night, but they will come like 20 to 30 minutes to Athens. So we were pretty surprised, and I'm always continuously surprised every time that we run the night. We do it about once every like 2 months or so, and it's just like a big thing, and a lot of people are like really into it. And it's a very unassuming goth night. It's not, I mean, it's very laid back. It's all about just having a good time and dancing to good music. And I think we do a pretty good job at fostering a like fun party environment. So
one of the because obviously we've talked about the whole idea that goth continues in the kind of the new era. What kind of bands are you playing from the new stuff are you digging at the moment that's coming out in the last couple of years?
Yeah, there's so many good bands right now that it's like almost overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I mean, in my current rotation, stuff that I like to play, especially at Goth Night, where it's like kind of upbeat, up tempo, dancey stuff. I've been playing a lot of one of my favorite bands right now is Secret Shame. They're from Asheville. They're about an hour and a half away from us in North Carolina. They have very heavy Exmal Deutschland vibes, Susie, a little bit more death rock involved, but just really fantastic musicianship. And I actually just saw them play a couple nights ago, and they were unbelievable. And we get the privilege of playing with them on our first show on our tour coming up in a couple weeks here.
Oh wow! Well, I'm looking them up because they sound great.
Yeah, they're phenomenal. And so I've been playing them and another band called Corin. It's Korinne. Corin.
Oh yes, I know them. Yeah, from Philadelphia, right?
Philadelphia, yeah. And they're just really gorgeous, super danceable synth pop with sort of a gothy slant. And
I thought there's a very New Order feel to those guys, like early New Order.
Yes, yeah. It's like that first record, that movement, kind of New Order. Who else have I been really digging? I mean, Actors is I think it's a no-brainer. They're one of the standards, I think, right now for. I'm
looking forward to seeing them in London when they come through in October. Hopefully they make it through, but I'm definitely going to that if they're coming back.
Yeah, that's it's what an unfortunate sentiment that we're all experiencing right now. It's like, I hope we get to do this, but it's kind of touch and go. But I'm optimistic. I think that I think this winter and spring are going to look a lot different than things look right now. So, but maybe I'm just ignorantly optimistic. I don't know. But let's see here. Let me name one more. Another band that I really have been enjoying is a good friend of mine. It's Jack from Panic Priest, and he's in Chicago.
Oh yeah.
And he's just I saw him a couple years ago. I met with them and set up a show for him in Athens, and he's just an immaculate musician. His last record's just like phenomenal, really, really well done, high production, just stellar musicianship, and he has an incredible voice. So yeah, that's kind of stuff I've been playing lately. A lot of.
It's interesting because quite a bit of that actually crosses over to some of the nights over here that are playing similar stuff, and it's kind of nice to see that both sides of the Atlantic are both digging the same ideas at the moment, because I think there's so much coming out of Europe, but there's also so much coming out of the US right now. And a lot of it isn't, and going back to what we were saying earlier, a lot of it isn't from traditional people that we might call goth either.
Right.
Corin, I think in particular, are a band that I don't really think come from a goth background.
Right.
And they kind of, but they for all the world sound like it, and it's and I think that's really good. We've got young people coming through that are kind of bringing these new ideas, and it's opening the world of so much great music right now.
Absolutely.
And you only need to look at some of the pop world as well. I mean, some of the kind of the newer pop stars. I mean, if they weren't teenage goths, I'll eat my hat.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's the goth accessibility or just sort of the level of ubiquitousness of goth, I guess, in pop culture is sort of a waxing and waning thing throughout the years. I mean, it's sort of it's very well known to be sort of cyclic in that way. But I do genuinely feel that in the 20 years that I've been privy to it and sort of heavily involved in it, that this is the best time for it. And I think that if you just sort of look at it as a cultural nuance or through a historical lens, I mean, if you look at the original sort of post-punk goth rock movement in the late 70s, mid 80s, I mean, we were in kind of a shit show as well with the Cold War, and everybody thought the world was basically going to end, and there was environmental crises, not as bad as now, but there was definitely a lot of consideration with that, and just political upheaval, and I think we're sort of inadvertently back to a place where goth and post-punk does well, because I think it mirrors the sentiment of what a lot of people are thinking about. And I mean, I think a lot about why do I like this stuff so much, and it's to me it's all about like a sober stark acceptance of reality, instead of just pushing it away and saying, well, these horrible things, these dark macabre things don't exist, but instead it's an analysis of those things. And I think more than ever, our societies in the Western world, and really the whole global world, are having to take a look at some really stark realities, like with the pandemic, like our effect on each other's health, with global climate change, our effect on the world, and how small actions all accumulate to make changes on our ecosystem, and then also obviously for both our countries, our effect militarily on third world countries that we interdict and like try to make things better, but inevitably make things worse in some ways.
And as both of our countries are finding out right now, maybe we don't quite have the the clout and the power to be able to make better that we did, because I mean, my own country, of course, have shot themselves in both feet over the last couple of years, and now they suddenly go, well, we could do with some help here, and everyone's gone, oh, you've burned a couple of bridges here, lads.
I was I mean, I'm a huge fan of England insofar as the culture, and one of my best friends lives in Bristol, so I've been to England many times. I've been to Scotland and Ireland, and just like everywhere in the islands, I love it there. And I don't know nearly as much as I should about Brexit, but I really, from the beginning, when that all sort of started, the rumblings and the movement to make that happen, I was still over in Germany, and it was just like everybody in Germany was like, what in the hell is going on? Like, it was so weird to just have that happen. And it was,
well, my dad actually grew up on German air bases as well. His dad was stationed over there as a teenager, and so he follows German TV and German media a lot because he's a bilingual. And he's kind of been commenting on the same, and other friends of mine in Europe are also saying the same, that the press outside of England, we're all looking at it going, the hell are you doing? Why? And we're still at me and my friends are all, as you can probably imagine, very much pro-Europe, and
Yeah.
we're all looking at this in horror, going, "What the hell have we done?" You know,
Yeah.
and it's going to take some years because the pandemic has helped mask some of it, and you know, and in terms of a macro level, we're a micro level, if you want. We're looking at it from ourselves of like, you know, what has this changed? I mean, obviously, bands can, you know, how bands tour will change. What bands come to us will change, and we've already noticed a number of bands announcing European tours and not announcing UK dates, and that's like shit. So maybe, you know, that's a you know, a cultural problem that it's going to become, because what happens with bands for future, you know, American bands will likely still come because, well, you know, there is an audience for what you do in England, very much so. But we've got to look to the future and think, well, what's going to change? And right now, I don't know. But I'm not looking at it with that much positivity, which is kind of sad, because I want to. You know, I want a future that looks better than it does right now. We've got the 20s, right? The roaring 20s and all this. You know, hey, we're all going to drink ourselves till we drop, and it'll be great fun. But I think there's going to be, you know, there's a reckoning to come. But like you said, with climate change, with militarily things, what have we done? What kind of Pandora's box have we opened or reopened? Right now, I don't know. I mean, so for now, I kind of guess that, you know, our route and escape for this, and I'm sure the same with you guys, that, you know, music becomes that escape route. And I don't want to hear about songs about pandemics or songs about isolation. I want to hear, you know, kind of better songs by bands that want to say something and we want to listen to. And, you know, you guys are doing that. Other bands that I've talked to this week are as well. And I think there is something to be positive about, even if it isn't what's outside our front door.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, as much as our music is very intense lyrically, you know, the central message of a lot of my lyrics are, you know, getting through or getting along. Like I like to say that, you know, it's not good to think about getting through mental health issues. It's good to get along with them, because they don't ever really go away. You know, the things that I've experienced that have caused post-traumatic stress I've understood that they will never leave me. I mean, that's just something that I live with now. But the central message is to get along with those things and to find ways through and to fight, because it's an active fight. You can't just sort of passively expect yourself to get better when you're going through hell. You know, that's old Winston Churchill right there calling back. So I think that it's just something that has to be there has to be an innate desire to like be willing to go through that fight. And that's a lot of our music. So I think in the end, it's really positive, but it doesn't shy away from accepting the reality, which is that, like, you know, sometimes, you know, even though you may have that desire to fight through, sometimes it seems insurmountable, and it seems insanely difficult to find yourself in a place where you can get through or get along with your trauma. But I agree. You know, I think it's there's going to be a lot of songs about isolation in the next, you know, 5 to 10 years, and I think that that's always been a reoccurring theme in post-punk music, just because, like, you know, most of us are like at least somewhat sort of different from the norm, you know, if there is a norm. That we're sort of, you know, we're not the everyday folks that you see at your local Tesco, just like buying, you know, it's a little bit different. So I think you know, there's nothing wrong with it inherently, but I do agree. I mean, I think that what I'm more interested in, what I'm writing about a lot now for what's going to become our second LP next year, is more of like societal force and what, okay, we're stuck inside, we got it, but like what is it that's making this shit last forever? And that's the stuff that I'm really more interested in exploring, is sort of the willful ignorance of so many people to be so brainwashed into believing like utter misinformation and you know, just things like that, where, I mean, I think we are in America, especially, I mean, you guys definitely have your lovely man Boris over there. And he's, you know, I mean, he's just like Trump Jr., but like here, it is so utterly insane to witness so many people who are just like, it's a death cult. I mean, they're like so absolutely adherent to the bullshit that was spread from him last year, from i.e. Trump, that they are, you know, now there's just like huge anti-vax movement here in the States. We have, if you're in the United States and you want a vaccine, you can get it immediately. I mean, you just go down
and now over here as well.
Yeah. So that's great, but like there's so many people here in the States that are just like, I will never get this. And you know, I'm a paramedic, so I'm not a doctor, but I understand a lot of the science because I spent a lot of time last year reading about mRNA vaccine technology, the actual pathology of the virus. I spent just so much time because I had nothing but time, and it was, you know, it's part of my job to know this disease as best as I can. And the just utter dedication to pseudoscience and conjecture is just staggering right now. It's just like, it blows my mind that what people believe in. And when you challenge it with like clinically tried science and fact-based evidence, people just, they get violently angry, and they shut down immediately because they have pledged their allegiance to that death cult. And I mean, I hate to say it, but a lot of them are literally going to die because they just will not get this vaccine. And I told a friend the other day who's like kind of hesitant because she's just like, I don't know how I feel about vaccines in general. And I was like, look, this disease is not going to go away. This virus will be here amongst the population for probably forever. And the reality is like, you might get a mild case now or a second time, but that third time, you know, it may not be so great for you. And we're seeing, like with the Delta variant, I'm seeing a lot younger people getting really sick. I've taken a lot younger people to the hospital, whereas in last year it was almost entirely elderly people with a bunch of comorbidities. Now it's younger people, like perfectly healthy people. It's not a crazy amount, but it's enough to cause alarm. And I mean, our hospital system here in the States is just like totally wrecked right now. It's absolutely getting smashed because the way it works is like, we can normally only withstand so much under normal times. And then you add a pandemic, and then now people are dying from things like heart attacks, strokes.
That shouldn't be, because they should be looked after, right? Yeah.
I mean, you know, we'll take patients in that should be seen within 10, 15 minutes, and they'll be critical. And then we're sitting there with them in our gurney from the ambulance for 45 minutes before they're even assessed by an emergency physician for triage. And I'm just sitting there watching them, trying to keep them stable.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a guy go into cardiac arrest on my gurney while we were waiting for a bed, just because there was nothing left the other day. And it was just like, you know, I mean, I'm like sitting there, I'm just watching him decline. And I'm like, hey, this guy's critical. We need to get him to a room. And there's just no room.
Yeah, there's nowhere to go.
And then it was until he went to cardiac arrest, and then they said, okay, now they have to deal with it.
So on that happy note, we should probably wrap up. But I traditionally do this at the end. Feel free to plug your social media and ways to find your music.
Sure. Yeah. So we're pretty active on social media. Instagram, it's Vision Video Band. Pretty much all of our social media is just Vision Video Band, all one word. We also I do a lot of really embarrassing stuff on TikTok, if that's your thing. You know, it's just like unadulterated, just me joking around. And that's also Vision Video Band. So if you're looking for a little bit of a laugh, at my expense, by all means. And then, you know, as far as the music, which is the most important aspect, basically anywhere you stream, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, what have you, it's all out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will put a link
out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will put a link
out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will put the
but
link
out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will put the link
out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will put the link
out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will put the link
out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will put the link
out there. We're pretty much cross-platform.
We will hopefully others will too. All right,
Yes,
well, thank you.
absolutely. Thanks so much. Yeah,
Thank you.
cheers.